Imagine finding a crisp $100 bill tucked away under your mattress after 60 long years. It's a treasure trove, right? Wrong. That $100 from 1958 is worth a mere fraction of its former value today. What once could buy a decent meal for a family now barely covers a cup of coffee. This perplexing phenomenon is called inflation. Inflation is the insidious creep of rising prices. What cost $1 in 1958 might set you back 10, 20, or even $100 today. It's like watching your purchasing power dwindle over time. But why does this happen? Who is responsible for this economic mischief? Let's see the culprits behind inflation today. So, what exactly is causing the relentless rise in prices we call inflation? It's not some mysterious force or the work of government figures. Instead, it's a whole interplay of economic factors. Let's break down some of the main culprits. One key driver of inflation is something economists call demand pull inflation. Imagine everyone suddenly has more money to spend. With more cash in people's pockets, demand for goods and services skyrockets. Stores can't keep up, and to capitalize on this increased demand, they raise prices. It's like a bidding war, but for everything from groceries to gadgets. Think of it like a crowded airplane. There are a limited number of seats, but everyone wants a first-class ticket. Airlines know they can charge more for those coveted seats, so prices go up. It's the same principle in the broader economy. Another factor fueling inflation is what's known as cost-push inflation. This happens when the costs of producing goods and services increase. Maybe the price of raw materials like oil or wheat spikes due to a natural disaster or geopolitical tensions. Or perhaps wages go up, increasing labor costs for businesses. To maintain their profit margins, companies often pass these higher costs on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Or consider the recent surge in energy costs. As the price of oil and gas rises, it impacts the cost of transportation, manufacturing, and even heating our homes. Businesses often absorb these increased costs by raising their prices. Another factor that can fuel inflation is a phenomenon known as the wage price spiral. This happens when wages and prices chase each other in an upward cycle. When companies pay their employees more, they often need to raise prices to maintain their profit margins. Higher prices, in turn, can lead to demands for even higher wages, and so on. This cycle can be particularly pronounced when unemployment rates are low. With fewer workers available, companies may find it difficult to replace employees who demand higher wages. To retain their skilled workforce, they might agree to these wage increases, which can again lead to higher prices. Lastly, the major contributing factor to inflation is the decline in a currency's value. This can happen for several reasons, but one of the most significant is when a government prints excessive amounts of money. Imagine if you suddenly had twice as much money to spend. The value of each dollar would be cut in half, making everything more expensive. This is essentially what happens when a government overprints currency. While a little bit of inflation is generally considered manageable, extreme cases can lead to hyperinflation, a catastrophic economic event where prices skyrocket out of control. Countries like Venezuela and Zimbabwe have experienced hyperinflation, rendering their currencies virtually worthless. In Zimbabwe, the situation became so dire that the government was printing banknotes worth trillions of dollars, yet they were barely worth a few cents in other currencies. But today, we aren't talking about hyperinflation. If you'd like a video about countries that have experienced hyperinflation and the reasons behind it, please comment below. We'll cover them one by one. Okay. So beyond the economic factors we've explored, it's fascinating to observe how inflation has behaved recently. The global lockdowns triggered a dramatic shift in consumer behavior. With people staying home and businesses shuttered, spending plummeted. This sudden drop in demand had a cooling effect on inflation, almost the opposite of the demand pull inflation we discussed earlier. Governments around the world responded to this economic downturn by injecting cash into the economy. This stimulus aimed to cushion the financial blow for individuals and businesses. However, a common concern arose. Could this influx of cash reignite inflation? And we are suffering with that answer today. At first glance, it seems idyllic. Prices stay constant, your savings retain their value, and life becomes more predictable. But is it truly desirable? While a world without price increases might sound appealing, it's essential to remember that inflation isn't entirely bad. It encourages spending rather than hoarding money. If prices were always falling, people would delay purchases, hoping for even lower prices in the future. This could stifle economic growth. Also, moderate inflation allows for adjustments in wages and salaries, helping to maintain a balance between labor and capital. Moreover, deflation, the opposite of inflation, can be equally problematic. When prices are consistently dropping, consumers may postpone purchases, anticipating even lower prices in the future. This can create a vicious cycle, leading to decreased economic activity and job losses. This brings us to an intriguing relationship between inflation and unemployment, often depicted by the Phillips curve. This economic model suggests an inverse relationship between the two. When inflation is high, unemployment tends to be low and vice versa. It's as if they're engaged in a delicate dance. However, it's essential to remember that the Phillips curve isn't a rigid rule. Extreme economic conditions like hyperinflation can distort this relationship. Also, other factors such as government policies and global events can influence both inflation and unemployment. Given these complexities, policymakers aim for a Goldilocks level of inflation, not too hot, not too cold. A slightly positive inflation rate is generally considered desirable as it encourages spending and investment. In the United States, the Federal Reserve targets an inflation rate of around 2%. Other countries may have slightly different targets. To manage inflation, central banks employ various tools, with interest rate adjustments being the most common. By raising interest rates, central banks make borrowing more expensive, which can slow down economic activity and reduce inflationary pressures. Conversely, lowering interest rates can stimulate borrowing and spending, potentially boosting economic growth, but also increasing inflation risks. Other levers at the government's disposal include fiscal policy, such as tax adjustments and government spending. For instance, increasing taxes can reduce disposable income, curbing spending and inflation. Conversely, government spending can inject money into the economy, potentially stimulating growth but also inflationary pressures. Generally speaking, inflation tends to rise alongside economic growth and fall during recessions. However, this isn't always the case. Sometimes economies face a peculiar situation called stagflation, where inflation soars while the economy is stagnating or even shrinking. This occurs when factors like rising oil prices or other production costs push prices up, even as overall economic activity slows down. On the other hand, there have been instances of deflation, falling prices, coexisting with economic growth. The United States experienced this during the late 19th century, a period known as the Great Deflation. Advancements in technology and increased productivity offset falling prices, leading to economic expansion. Returning to our earlier discussion about government handouts during a recession, it's unlikely that such measures would spark significant inflation. While injecting money into the economy can increase demand, the overall impact would be minimal when demand is already depressed. Ultimately, inflation's effects on individuals are undeniable. The eroding purchasing power of money over time means that savings dwindle and the cost of living rises. This is why many people seek investment options like gold, which tend to hold their value better over time.
Understanding inflation is now more important than ever for making informed financial decisions. While it's a difficult economic concept, its impact on our daily lives is undeniable. By grasping the factors that influence inflation and its potential consequences, we can better protect our financial well-being. Want to stay ahead of economic trends and make smarter financial choices? Subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis and expert insights. Let us know in the comments if you have any specific questions about inflation or other economic topics.